The podcast universe has exploded with amazing content for everyone to listen to. And there are so many incredible shows with just not enough time to listen to all of them. So if you're asking yourself, what do I listen to? The answer is real simple. Thrive Loud is the must-listen to, can't miss an episode, gotta hear what's next, most fun, energizing, and inspiring podcast show you'll ever encounter. With hundreds of episodes of guests ranging from CEOs, entrepreneurs, innovators, thought leaders, inspiring speakers to amazing humans, Thrive Loud is the real deal. Listen in as Lou Diamond decodes what makes incredible people thrive. If you're a regular listener, you already know this. And if this is your first time listening, get ready to thrive loud with Lou Diamond.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond, connecting you to the most inspiring and amazing people that are thriving each and every day. Today on Thrive Loud, we have an award-winning veteran of the music industry with expertise ranging from being a drummer since the age of 2 and a producer to an artist development and label founder, an audio consultant, producer, technologist, integrator, author, and recording engineer. He has gone on to work with Aerosmith, the Rolling Stones, Ringo, Starr, Elton John, Sting, Bryan Adams, Journey, Styx, Phil Collins, Shakira, Pat Metheny, Rascal, Ozzy, Osbourne, and Corea, to name a few. I think I've been to a lot of those concerts. We're going to talk about that. He has authored 3 books as part of Frangioni Media, including Icon and Crash, and continues leading the industry with his companies Audio One, All Access IDA, and his nonprofit Frangioni Foundation. Thrive Loud listeners, get the beat on. David Frangioni is here with us today. How are you, David?
Hello. Good morning. Doing great. Great to be here, everyone.
David comes from the greater South Miami area, and he has quite an interesting story and calls himself, or has been called, a serial entrepreneur. So, David, I'm going to let you share with our listeners a little bit of your story, and we'll jump right into all the things that you're doing. That sound like a fair way to kick things off?
Absolutely. Starting at the beginning, at age 2, I found the drums. It was actually a little before 2, and then around the same time.
Wait! Before 2 years old. So were your parents in the music world, or you just started banging on things?
No, they weren't. And I got a toy drum kit, and I have no idea why. My parents are no longer with us. My dad passed in '96, and my mom in '04. And I really should have gotten a lot more background prior to their departing on how that even happened. And in fact, until my mom passed away in '04 and I found pictures from that time period of 16, 18 months and a little older, I thought I started playing the drums at 7 or 8 when I got a drum kit and was playing on phone books and all those kinds of things. But when I discovered these other pictures, I realized that it went way back. So they got me a toy kit, paper drum heads. I destroyed them. They replaced them. I destroy them again. And what ended up happening is I was diagnosed at 2 years old with retinoblastoma, which is cancer of the eye. And the only way to save me was to remove my right eye. So I've been blind in my right eye since age 2. And that ended up forming my entire life. There was a lot of trauma that went along with that in my childhood. I have a prosthetic, a lot of challenges, both physically and emotionally and aesthetically. And it was really a lot to go through, quite frankly. But music was my refuge. And I just love the drums and have loved them my entire life. So I indulged myself into drumming. My parents supported that. We didn't have much for means, but they saved up. They got me a used drum kit after they saw that I was practicing on phone books and that it wasn't just a passing fad. This is around 7 or 8 years old. I was playing in the elementary school drumming little section they had on a practice pad, and I'd stand up in front of the school assembly on certain days of the month and do little snare drum performances on a pad as well. And so they saw that this was something that I really was serious about at that age, or as serious as I could be. And it just grew from there. And I don't have the answers as to why, other than it was just in my bloodstream. Otherwise, it wouldn't have gone that far that soon, because by the time I was 12, I was actually gigging and doing like pickup bands. By the time I was 16, I had already played a lot of gigs. By the time I was 19, I had over 1,000 gigs under my belt, and I was the band leader in most of my bands, booking them.
Amazing.
So I'm booking bands into clubs that I can't even legally get into. Thank God I've never had a drink or a cigarette or a drug, not even tried them. So I lived very cleanly, but I was in dirty environments, right? Because they're like not very nice clubs. But I just was so focused on playing and getting better as a musician and learning and the thrill of playing on a stage with other musicians. And that just had so much focus for me that's all that I really looked at, even though the environments were really dodgy. And then around 17, 18, in this whole period of, studying drums with Joe Morello and Alan Dawson and really thinking in my mind, this is going to be my career. I found technology, and I found it, music technology, of course. I found it through the pursuit of wanting to be a great drummer, because now we're in the early to mid 80s, and electronics within drumming is becoming, quite significant. And previous to that, it was just here and there, but now it's actually starting to become a pretty important part of drumming. And as I'm playing in all these bands, and I'm playing the same songs I hear on the radio, because most of these bands were cover bands, the drums don't sound right. And I'm like, well, I'm playing exactly what I hear. And I realized how much of the electronics are impacting the overall feel and performance of the drumming. So I started to pursue that, and I ended up falling in love with music technology as much or more than drumming. So now I find myself at 18 years old with this driving passion for drumming, music, and technology. And I just loved it so much. Still do. Of course, nothing's actually changed other than I think more, love for it and interest in it. And I was just driven to start a business. I started a MIDI consulting business after learning, teaching myself quite a bit about MIDI. I started to do consulting, and then it just grew from there. So that's kind of chapter, 1 and 2, if you will.
Let me jump in on this consulting stuff. So the work that you're doing with a lot of the MIDI and the digital music and audio technology, what were you consulting to professional artists or into the production of actual music that was being recorded?
Well, initially it was anybody that had MIDI equipment that needed help setting it up.
Got it.
I've always been a believer, and I got this from my mother, is that you go into education and experiential learning full force. Like you become a subject matter expert as much as you possibly can, and then you jump in and go. So I always had a learned approach because of what she taught me. And that really served me, because I learned so much about the different aspects of MIDI. And then when I started consulting, what happened was I realized I have to make a living, right? As I said, we didn't have any means. There was no option for me to just learn. At some point, I had to transition that into, making a living. And I wanted to as well. So I went to the local music chain. At that time, it was EU Wurlitzer. They had like 5 or 6 stores. And the president of the company, who oversaw, of course, all the stores, is a gentleman named Gene Jolly, still a friend of mine to this day. He's an audio and retail music industry legend. And he really saw, the drive that I had, and he was very supportive. And I said, Gene, will you hire me for EU Wurlitzer to be your in-house MIDI expert, and I'll help everybody who buys stuff here? It was kind of like the foreshadowing of like the Geek Squad as we know it today.
I got it.
And he was a Dale Carnegie graduate and like a very insightful man, and is an insightful man. And he said to me, I'm not going to hire you because you shouldn't work for somebody. I know you want a gig and you need to make a living, but you need to continue doing this on your own. But what I will do is you do the legwork and put together the plan and the marketing, and I'll give you my stores to be the the place where you can do the lead generators. And it was brilliant because I made these signs that were laminated MIDI consultant signs and put my info, got a 1-800-345-MIDI phone number, which rang in my bedroom, in our little house. And the rest was just, hustling to, get as many clients as I could. And because he supported me and he let me put these signs up and he told his staff, hey, anybody that comes into the keyboard department or the drum department or the sound department, like everywhere where MIDI lives, send them to Frangioni. And you guys focus on selling, he'll focus on support. And I built up a really big consulting business from that, worked really hard. I even bartered one of my clients to improve my sign because he had a printing business. But all of these guys and girls that I was meeting to consult for, they were typically at this stage in my career, they were mostly wealthy people that could afford big MIDI rigs and didn't have a clue what to do with them. And I would go in and I would get it all worked out. And I built up a loyal following because I every single gig I did, I had literally no exaggeration. I had 100% happy rate, satisfaction rate. So I kept getting referrals. People would call me back. They'd buy new gear. And then around the same time, at this time, I'm still gigging because I have to make a living. So I'm still playing the drums for a couple bucks a week up till 2, 3 in the morning, get up early, do my MIDI consulting. Because it worked great because the consulting people normally stopped by 7 or 8 at night and the drumming gig started at 9 or 10 at night. So I was going around the clock, which, by the way, some things never change. And I got a call from the bass player in Aerosmith, Tom Hamilton, who found me through EU Wurlitzer. Crazy. And so he was at Wurlitzer one day and he's like, oh, wow, there's somebody who can help me with my MIDI rig. So he calls me up and I go to his house and I help him he had a MIDI rig to write songs. And we worked a couple of weeks together on and off. And about a month after that, he called me out of the blue and he said, hey, the band is starting to work on the kind of, they were transitioning from finishing the Pump album to putting together all the Pump tour sounds and game plan. And he said, would you be interested? I'm not offering you a gig, but would you be interested in coming down and meeting the band and see how it goes? I think you could help us. I think you could not only help me, but I think you could help the band. So of course, he doesn't even finish the sentence and I'm there. And so I'm introduced at that time to the band Aerosmith, to all the members. I go to their rehearsal and start working with Steven Tyler instantly, and that never left. Wow. Just same thing kind of happened that was happening with my other clients, where we really gelled, and I was able to add a lot of value and bring ideas, and I became their in-house technologist engineer. Ended up doing 7 records and tour backline and amusement park ride sound and pinball machine sound and on. And it's just, that's the beginning of the next chapter.
Yeah. So David, going through here are these chapters. This is obviously a lot of travel, I imagine. You were on tour with not only them, but other artists as well.
Well, it was a lot of travel, but it wasn't going on tour as a member of the entourage. It was going on tour to make sure that what I had worked with them on was working, and to, check in with them, network, stay in touch, keep the relationship going, see what they needed. I've never been part of a tour as far as like the road crew kind of thing. I've always been, a work for hire consultant, where I go in at the beginning of the tour, figure out what they need, or I should say the beginning of the tour rehearsals, right. Figure out what they need, and then get it rolling, go to the first couple shows, and then the crew take it from there.
Got it. Okay. So now in this chapter, you're basically the expert guru for many of these performers that I listed, obviously, at the opening of the show.
Well, it started with Aerosmith and Debbie Gibson and New Kids on the Block, and some really big artists that were Boston and New York based, because I was going between the two cities and started to build a network and working. At the beginning, I would work for free. I just wanted to prove myself. And then I'd say, well, if you don't have anything for me after that, then, if you find anybody that does, please pass my name along. But it always led to something.
Right.
And people saw that my passion and interest in being as great as I could at what I do and at adding value to the project was my focus. It wasn't on trying to make a buck. Yes, I needed to make a living, but I always went into the projects just wanting an opportunity to collaborate. And I knew the rest would take care of itself. And so I was able to create a lot of opportunities. It was a nonstop hustle. I mean, I worked really, really hard and still do. But at that period, you're working on entirely on faith, right? I think entrepreneurship is legalized gambling anyway. But back then, there was no evidence that anything was going to come out of this, right? It was all faith that I love what I do and I'm going to find a way to keep doing it. I was very driven to not end up in a rut. I watched my parents, who were the most amazing people that I ever met and was inspired by, and who loved me to death and did everything they could for me. But my dad was a meat cutter and my mom was a legal secretary, and they had no means. And I watched the suffering that caused, and that here were these amazing people, but they just, they came from a depression-based era that had a different mentality about how to approach life. And that just seemed like a death sentence to me. I just was so driven to I want to live life to the fullest. I want to have a life that when it's over, I took it as far as I could and I left a legacy. Yeah. And that life after me is a little bit better for somebody or a group of people than it would have been had I not, been on this planet. So it was really important to not go back to that. So it was almost like a fear of failure that drove me to really, really, as high as I can possibly go.
Let's do the condensed version to how we got to where we're at today. So we took from music, and then what was next?
Well, as I'm working with Aerosmith and starting to work with other artists, because, that inner circle of rock stars is pretty tight. And so virtually everybody that I worked with would refer me to someone else. And so I built up, it's become a really great clientele of successful musicians and related. And as that's happening, I realized that I need a company. I can't take all these referrals in this business and just do it myself. I can only be in one or two places at a time. So I started Audio One, and I focused it at first on building recording studios. And then from there, we evolved to home theaters, and then we added home automation. And I'll say that the reason that it took these different steps to become those three elements is that I always had it be whatever I wanted to do myself. So at first, I wasn't interested in doing a home theater or home automation because the technology wasn't very good in the home.
Right.
So I really, when I was interested in it as a passion, but as a business and as anything that I thought was really good, I wasn't interested. And then some technology and some companies on the manufacturing side in the early 90s started to change that. And I saw that, okay, now I can do home theater for real. My clients will be satisfied with what I'll do for a home theater. So I did one for myself. It wasn't a theater with a projector and all that because my room was too small, but it was the elements with speakers and amps and processor. And I started to really learn about surround sound and understand all of the nuances between how to measure the distances and, the EQ and the offsets and the bass management, all these things that are really important to proper surround sound playback. And then we offered home theater as another element to Audio One after studios. And then, of course, what's the most important thing in somebody's home when they have a whole lot of gadgets is the user interface. How do I can use all this stuff? Because it's one thing if David Frangioni's over for dinner, he'll make sure everything works. But what happens when he leaves? So that's where home automation came in. And it was really important to make sure that these systems worked very easily. And so I discovered control systems at the beginning, Crestron. I realized how much there was to know about Crestron. So I went to Crestron. They actually invited me to headquarters in 95, and they gave me personalized training. I became a Crestron certified programmer in my spare time. And that was something that was really important because that gave me a lot of understanding that having a home automation business, a lot of guys don't have that depth where they really understand what's going on. So whatever the programmer tells them, they kind of have to believe because they don't know if it's true or not. But in my case, as a programmer, I understood exactly how all of this should work. And at the beginning, I was doing all the programming for the company as well. And the systems worked really reliably. So again, we got word of mouth. And I started to understand from a business perspective, a happy client is a returning client, and a returning client is a referring client, and a referring client is a paying client. I started to understand how this makes for a better business and a better living as a result. And of course, opportunity for hiring employees and impacting other people's lives in a positive way. So, that was the next chapter.
David, this is really great because I'm doing a little bit of what I'll call your summarizing, but you've always had a grasp of or a pulse to what the beat is, from 2 years old to understanding how to get rhythm, to playing with music, to understanding the importance of the sound, to understanding the importance of sound to someone else or media to someone else, and being able to use each one of those experiences. But interestingly, wrapped around this with the bow, and you've hinted to it several times, is the importance of serving your customers. And it was never about the money. It was always about delivering for them. And that, I love that expression, the happy client as a referring client, and then a referring client is a paying client, and a paying client is one that's going to continue to make your business grow. And I think that it's so important because you've never made it about what the revenue should be. You've always made it about the heart of what you do. And that is pretty freaking cool. Is that your assessment of what your whole career has been, with all these different parts of how this is pulled together as this serial entrepreneur?
Yes, it is. I always want to be successful in all ways, and I never want to go back to being basically poor. But what you're describing is accurate because you're really talking about the heart and soul and the essence of it. It's not that I don't put importance on revenue growth and how the company is going to financially, prosper, but it's where it's where your priorities are. And I guess what you're really saying, and it's absolutely true, is that it's what drives me. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with people being driven entirely by money. That's not for me to judge. It's just and there are, a lot of successful and a lot of famous people that are driven by money. But the most successful people I've seen that are driven by money have figured out ways, if they're in my type fields of business, any of the things that I do, they figured out ways to serve the people that will give them the money. So, okay. It's, so whatever drives you, it still comes down to what you also correctly summarize, which is you've got to deliver the goods. You've got to bring value. That's the key thing. And it's easy to say, but it took me a while to really maturely understand and evolve that concept.
David, I'll say this. It's really interesting because there's some similarities. Earlier this year, we had John Storick, a very well-known architect. I'm sure you guys have overlapped, who obviously built many sound studios. And he shared his whole journey about being around the pulse of designing, because he was an architect first. Right.
And an Electric Ladyland.
Right. And exactly. And then that was our episode, and we chatted about his whole story and obviously his ability to design things to incorporate sound, and knowing obviously the right players to go within that. But what was so interesting is that it was always about the design. It was always about, that was who he was, an architect. And obviously this is great that, you have an ear for how things are. And this is pretty cool. And I love asking this question. So let's do this. What does your world look like today? Give us Audio One and Frangioni Media. Just if I took a snapshot of your world today, because we know you've written books and you have foundations, but I want to understand the scope of the business, so our Thrive Loud listeners can understand how, when following your passion, this is, become your whole life's work.
Well, absolutely. Well, today it's really multifaceted. And it's, Frangioni Media does all of the non-home work. Yep. So that would be recording studios, digital facilities, any Pro Tools systems, anything, House of Worships. We did a beautiful House of Worship transformation where they hadn't done anything with the stage and the presentation aspect of this House of Worship for 30 years. And now it looks like a state of the art, like beautiful. You put it on TV. It looks like one of these incredible House of Worships, visually and sonically. Cool. So all of that happens through Frangioni Media. That's what we've evolved to. Whereas Audio One does home theater and home automation now, because that's also a huge business. And they did the largest AV installation in the world as of 2018. That's something, of course, that might change in the future or will change because people are always kind of outdoing each other. But as of the end of 2018, Audio One did what has been officially determined as the largest AV installation of automation. It was over $10 million of AV. Nice. So you can imagine the rest of that.
I was about to say, I'd like to see what that looks like.
Oh yeah, no, it's right out of a movie. Believe me, you could put it in a James Bond movie and it would look right, right in place. And so so Audio One's that lane. Frangioni Media is the other lane. IDA, All Access IDA, which is inspire and develop artists, which is where I work with artists on a very high level, one at a time, from life coaching to artist coaching to basically taking them from where they are today to where they ultimately want to go. And then, at that point, they'll get a manager and they'll get a label and they'll go to the next level. But I'm in the artist development phase. That's another lane, another business. Of course, my writing. And I'm also publisher of Modern Drummer magazine, which is a fairly recent acquisition. I wanted a high-level press component to my portfolios. And, of course, what is bigger and better for someone who's had my life than Modern Drummer, the number one drum magazine in the world, and next to Ludwig and Ringo's Beatles kit, the most famous brand in the world. And so that's a huge honor. So I think between writing my books and having Modern Drummer, that's the writing and publishing creative outlet. And then IDA for artist development. And then, of course, Frangioni Media for commercial stuff and consulting. All of my individual consulting of products. I work with Noah Lee from Monster and other companies. And then I have the last lane would be Frangioni Foundation, which is where I do all of my nonprofit endeavors. And that's a drumming arm of nonprofit. We have a drum museum, and we do programming for children to learn the drums, and we offer it to other foundations. So my affiliations with Musicians on Call and Jason Taylor Foundation and Irie Foundation and Make-A-Wish, when they have a drumming need, whatever that might be, from a performance at a music store to going to the hospital and playing for the kids to making a kid's dream come true to play Neil Peart's drum kit at our museum and all of these different things, master classes, etc. Frangioni Foundation fulfills that, and we fundraise for it, and it's an actual, proper nonprofit.
David, I ask just about every guest that comes on this program, you've got lots of things going on and all this incredible activity and great growth over the years. And obviously to balance all this is a pretty impressive thing. However, we all have days where all of this can become a little cumbersome, and the ability to juggle it all can kind of not have you thriving on all cylinders. When you have trouble thriving, who or what practice do you seek to get yourself back on the thriving track?
Well, faith and prayer and belief in God for me is a huge component to this. So every day I have meditation time, typically in the very early morning, and absolutely at night. But as you mentioned, when there's really hard days, I go to a place of silence and really pray on it and just digest what's going on and usually can get clarity on what's caused this moment. And then with that, you can figure out the solution and then stay focused on it and not get lost in, different emotions that can distract you and depress you, like anger and frustration disappointment, and just things that naturally happen in our lives and in our minds and hearts and souls, and you just don't want to stay there very long. And so that's what I did. Faith, prayer, meditation, and always believe in God in a very focused and reverent manner.
David, I love the genuineness of that answer, but what I loved even more was when I described that some days you're not thriving, you gave this little this
some days
sigh reaction that was
that might be most days, my friend. Which life is not the easiest thing that you could imagine, but it's what we got. It's the essence of everything that we do, and so you want your health and you want your family and you want your mind all just as strong as you could possibly have it, and just thank God for every day that you get to live with good health, and with that you have unlimited opportunity.
Let's do this, David. We're going to provide all of the links in the show notes. Send our listeners, it's always great when they hear it from you, to the places that people can find you and learn more about all of the things that you offer, so they know how to go to it appropriately.
Okay, great. Thank you. DavidJFrangioni.com is the website, which Frangioni is Frangioni. And David Frangioni is my handle on all the socials. You already pretty clearly stated that I'm working in a lot of different areas and active. So my social media stuff is secondary to me, quite frankly. But the website, but I'm still up there, and the website is being updated all the time. So that's when you can see some of the cool projects that we're working on, and of course, FrangioniFoundation.com. We're always looking for believers and people who can help support the cause, because that's really doing some good for a lot of kids. And if you love the drums, it's drum heaven going to the museum.
Awesome. So now we're going to have not that we haven't been having fun, David, but we're going to pry a little more here. So first, we're going to go to the signature Thrive Loud question, because I got a preview of the answer and I thought it was interesting. David, can you share your all-time favorite movies? Because you actually said you have a tie for what that answer is.
I do.
Share with that.
I do, because it's, you'd think it'd be a Clint Eastwood movie since I've written 2 books on him.
We're going to get to that. Yeah.
But And it should have been, because there's a couple that are definitely up there. But I put Forrest Gump and Die Hard because I'm an action movie complete, aficionado. I love, especially modern day. Like modern day for me is 70s and up action movies. And Forrest Gump makes me cry every time I watch it. I absolutely I think of my family. I think of so many people that I've met and have impacted my life that remind me of him and the different characters in the movie and all the scenarios, and just his whole way of looking at life, with just never spending one moment in any of the emotions other than just next. And there's so many lessons in it. So I love Forrest Gump. And at the Drum Museum, actually, we have some stage props. We have some movie props from the movie, like the Nike shirt that he wore when he was running. And we have his army outfit from those scenes. We have some really cool stuff that I kind of sprinkled in with all the drums to just kind of bring this, these moments to life there, right? How to really kind of bring back that, that energy and that spirit. And Die Hard, one of the greatest action movies of all time. I just love the movie and all the sequels too, as a matter of fact. And
it's interesting. I happen to be a fan of the podcast show, The Rewatchables, which Bill Simmons hosts, and they talk about what a watershed movie Die Hard was, because it changed the way we looked at action movies, because it was, it was Die Hard. Every movie that followed afterwards was, this is Die Hard on a plane. This is Die Hard in an office.
Yeah.
Die Hard here.
Right.
And
that's right.
Yeah.
Die
a regular
a
guy becoming the hero in a crazy, nutty circumstance. So yeah, absolutely. Or Die Hard on a bus, which I think was Speed. So
yes, exactly.
Great movie too. So David, you hinted to this earlier, and that you are one of the more prominent Clint Eastwood fans and possibly collectors. Can you share this with the listeners? Your obsession, maybe might be the right word, with Clint Eastwood and how that came to be.
Well, it's an obsession with his films, or at least a very high level of interest. And I've always had this collector side of me. And I think that's the root of it. That's more important to share, I think, than even the Clint Eastwood, because Clint Eastwood is just one of the elements of that. I collected baseball cards as a kid, very seriously, ended up selling the collection at a major auction years ago. And so whatever I've kind of got into for collecting, that's how the Drum Museum initially formed, is this whole drum collection. And what happened in my early 40s is I realized that I didn't want to just keep collecting as I had as from being a kid, where you just collect because it's in your blood and your heart. And then at some point you realize, like, well, what am I doing with this collection? Like, I'm an adult now, and now it's taken some serious money and passion, and I don't want to just like show 3 people the collection, and like, what fun is that? And looking at it by myself isn't really fun. And doesn't really have any meaning. You know, once you collect it, you collect it. So I wanted to share it. And that's how the books came to be. But it's not with Clint Eastwood is the collecting obsession. It's with his film posters and his memorabilia. Because what happened as a kid is I would go to the movies every week. You got to remember that when you come from a trauma, you're looking for you don't realize this necessarily at the beginning, but you realize at some point that you're looking for a healthy outlet, an escape. And all of these different things you can do for escapism are really important to feed your spirit. And even as a kid, where you're still forming, your brain's still forming, and your life is certainly still just beginning, you're still looking for places where you feel safe and you feel inspired, and you just want to just absorb yourself in just things that feed your spirit. And that was the movies and drumming for me, those 2 things. So when I went to the theater, it was 25 cents on Saturday afternoon, and my mom would give me the quarter and drive me there, of course. And I was 10, 11 years old. And most of the time she would go with me, but sometimes she would let me go in and watch the movie, and then she'd be standing there, you know, the top of the theater seats as soon as the movie ended to make sure I was safe. And I saw all the movie posters, and I loved the art. I just thought that the excitement of looking at the poster and trying to figure out what the movie was and seeing what that element was as exciting as the movie itself. And so there was a guy named Mr. Gunn, no joke, that was really his name, at my Regent Theater, my local theater. And I got to know him because I was like, I would go to the popcorn stand and go, hey, how do I get one of those posters? And the people there were like, I don't know, you got to ask the manager, Mr. Gunn. And I introduced myself, and he kind of took a liking to me. And he said, hey, I'll tell you what, you walk up and down the aisle before the movie with a Jimmy Fund, which is a nonprofit, right, in Boston, where I'm from. And you walk up and down the aisle with the Jimmy Fund can and get people to put money in it. And I'll give you the posters when the movie run is over.
Great.
And so that's how I started collecting posters. And then it grew to this huge collection. And then I ended up with a lot of these really cool Clint Eastwood items that I thought a lot of other people would want to see. And there wasn't a way to I looked, and nobody had done a book on it. So I said, let me see about writing a book, and I'll give the money to charity. And so the first thing is I kind of took my experience with making records, and I said, well, books are probably a very similar path. And in some ways they were. So I figured, well, the first thing is to learn about what do you do to get a book out there. So of course you need to either self-publish or find a publisher. So I went out and I networked in my circle, but fortunately my network of friends are pretty high level friends. Yeah. So they were able to sit me down in front of major publishers. And I remember the first publisher I spoke to, I said, well, what do I do to really get this going? And they said, well, the first step before we even talk about a publishing deal for this book is you got to get Clint Eastwood involved. And I'm like, oh, that's all I have to do is just get Clint Eastwood involved. Oh, great. And so I was actually able to get to Clint Eastwood and through my circle, and he loved the idea. So he did get involved. So now I had Clint Eastwood involved in the idea. And so then I went back to the publishers and I thought, well, he's got a close relationship with Warner. He's got his own office on their lot. Of course, he's made all his films through them for quite some time. So I'll start with Warner Book Publishing. So I got a meeting with the head of Warner Book Publishing. And I said, I have this idea for this book and Clint's behind it. And I just thought for sure this woman who runs it, who I was meeting with, I thought for sure she was going to say, okay, you got Clint behind it. He's a close family friend of ours and the book idea is great. So let's do it. And she's telling me all those kinds of things in the meeting. And we get to the end of the meeting and I said, so would you be interested in publishing this then? And she's like, no. Like, what do you? She's like, no, it's not really something we would do, but I know exactly who are the publishers that do this kind of thing, movie art books. And she said, I'm going to personally send an email to the top 5 publishers of those. So now you get an email being sent out on my behalf from the head of Warner Book Publishing. It was incredible. So in just a matter of a couple of months, I was sitting in front of the 2 of the 5 biggest who were interested. The other 3 passed. And one of those 2 was Insight Editions. Raoul Goff is the owner and principal of that. He believed in the project and he signed me and has published all of these books.
That's great. Well, we'll make sure to put links to this. I'm actually checking it out right now, and this is unbelievable, this collection with this. I wanted to wrap with this because as someone who's a big Clint Eastwood fan, obviously there's Clint Eastwood, the actor, and then there's Clint Eastwood, the unbelievable director, because the range of movies. Are you a fan of also the post-acting career of Clint's? Because it really is, he's become... to say he's one of the best, he's up there, and he's still in his 80s, still doing it.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of his directing. I love it. And if you look back, starting with in the 70s, he was directing and starring in films, and it just grew to the Academy Award-winning Unforgiven and $1 Million Baby, and and then of course all his recent films. Sully and the 15-17 to Paris and all that. I mean, I love them all. Absolutely. And then, of course, my third book is Crash, which is the world's greatest drum kits, which are all these drum kits that are in the museum. And in fact, if you go to crashbook.com, we do giveaways of the book. So all you have to do is put your email in and you can enter to win a free Crash book.
We're going to put that link right at the bottom here of your page here. So that'll be very cool. I want to finish with the last question. I got one more for you because, David, it ran through me. You're a drummer still to this day. Is there one particular drummer or a drumming performance that is still one of your favorites, like your go-to maybe to even play or your favorite to listen to?
Well, like movies, it's a tie with drummers. Okay. But the one that's consistently inspired me and had the most impact as a kid was Carl Palmer.
Gotcha.
From Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Asia. And when I discovered his drum kit, which was a custom-made, iconic stainless steel drum kit, when I was 8 years old, approximately, maybe even a little younger. And I somehow saw a picture of this kit. I don't know if it was my older brother had the album or how I saw it. And it was this incredible, huge stainless steel custom-made drum kit. And every drum had an animal etching on it that I learned later on. Carl had a really fancy rifle collection, and on the butt of all the rifles, it had animal etchings as just kind of the design. And he took that idea and he had somebody etch the drums with that kind of style as well. So it's just like this really unique, creative approach. And then the drum kit was made by British Steel, who have made exactly one drum kit in their entire existence, and that was this one. And I heard his playing, which is like Buddy Rich meets prog, because, of course, Buddy's always been a huge influence to me. And And when you first discover Buddy Rich, like your head explodes and then you get back to earth and then you go, okay, let me try to figure out what's going on here. And Carl was very inspired by Buddy and got to know him, and his playing resembled Buddy's quite a bit. It was just so awesome. And so the sound of this huge kit, coupled with how it looked, coupled with Carl's playing, of course, was impactful to a huge degree. And I remember always saying to my parents, I want that drum kit. And they would look at me and they would go, oh, David, we love you so much. Like, you're so passionate and you have such big dreams. Like, you know, an international rock star based in London who has a $100,000 drum kit in 1974 and is one of the most famous drummers in the world and one of the most famous bands in the world, because ELP was playing stadiums at that point. Yeah, you're going to, you know, we have one car that costs $1,500 that we share among us.
Probably not going to happen.
And, you know, I think you're dreaming pretty big right now, but don't stop dreaming. Then the drum kit, when Carl finished with ELP, sold it to Ringo Starr. So now the most wealthy and successful drummer in history owns the drum kit. So now my parents are really like, oh yeah, how are you going to pry it out of Ringo Starr's hands, right? Like that'll go over well. You're not going to outbid him. And so it was just kind of, you know, something that always carried this huge inspiration, if you will. And something that, you know, that just, I was passionate about. And isn't it crazy that I own the drum kit now?
Wow.
I was able to buy it from Ringo Starr at auction a few years ago. And I ended up doing a drum duet with Carl Palmer on stage at a sold-out concert that we recorded, and it's out on a best-selling DVD that I mixed and co-produced with Carl and played on the stage. So yes, everybody, I am as crazy as I sound, because anybody that would go opposite Carl Palmer, especially a rusty music technologist on the drums, is crazy.
Dave.
But it worked out well, and the DVD came out great, and it's you know, it's just, it was a moment that was truly a culmination of several dreams. And it'll be with me forever.
That is an amazing story. And my producers really just got excited because now we know the music we're going to finish off this episode with.
Lucky man.
David Frangioni, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for taking us and keeping the beat the whole way through, sharing all these stories, continued success in all your businesses and all your passions. And thank you so much for coming on the program today.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and sending everybody my best.
And to all our Thrive Lab listeners out there, thank you for joining us. And until next time, keep thriving onward and upward. And remember, be brief, be bright, be gone.
You've been listening to Thrive Loud with your host, Lou Diamond. Make sure to subscribe on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. And follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Thrive Loud. Or find us on the web at thriveloud.com.